The day my father passed away felt like the ground had been ripped from beneath me. He wasn't just my dad, he was the anchor of our entire family, the man who built a business empire from nothing, and who taught me the value of hard work and integrity. After the funeral, our house was still filled with relatives and the scent of lilies from the memorial. People whispered condolences, but I barely heard them. I was still replaying his last words in my head, words that hinted there was more to his will than anyone knew. That's when my sister-in-law, Tiffany, strutted into the living room like she was walking a runway. She wore a sleek black dress that looked more suited for a cocktail party than a funeral. With a glass of wine in hand, she cleared her throat and announced loudly enough for the entire room to hear. "Just so everyone's aware, my husband, your brother, will be inheriting the whole empire. Dad wanted it that way." Every eye turned toward me. My brother, Daniel, stood behind her, looking uncomfortable but not denying her claim. My stomach knotted. Dad had never said anything about giving everything to Daniel. I forced a calm smile, but my mind was racing. Tiffany wasn't just making an announcement, she was marking her territory. And if I knew her at all, this was just the beginning of a much bigger game she was playing. I decided then and there, I wasn't going to roll over and accept whatever version of Dad's will Tiffany was trying to sell. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of raised voices coming from the kitchen. Tiffany's voice was sharp and dripping with fake sympathy. "Look, it's not personal," she said to my mother. "It's just business. Daniel was Dad's favorite, and the will reflects that. You can't expect to split something so big, it would just fall apart." I paused in the hallway, listening. My mother's voice trembled, but she held firm. "That's not how your father raised them. He believed in fairness." Tiffany gave a little laugh, the kind that could cut glass. "Fairness doesn't build empires. Strong leadership does. And Daniel's the leader now." I stepped into the kitchen before my mother could respond. Tiffany turned, flashing me a tight smile like I was an inconvenient interruption. "Good morning," she said sweetly. "We were just talking about how to make the transition smoother." "Funny," I replied, pouring myself coffee. "Because the last I checked, Dad's will hasn't even been read yet." Her smile faltered for just a second before she covered it with a sip of her latte. Daniel avoided my eyes, clearly wishing the conversation would end. But I wasn't going to let it go. Because if Tiffany was this confident, that meant she either knew something about the will, or she was planning to manipulate the situation until everyone believed her version of the truth. Either way, I needed answers, fast. Later that day, we gathered in Dad's old study, a room that still smelled faintly of his aftershave and old leather-bound books. The attorney, Mr. Keller, sat behind Dad's massive mahogany desk, shuffling through a thick envelope. Tiffany perched on the arm of Daniel's chair like she owned the place, her manicured hand resting possessively on his shoulder. Daniel looked tense, his knee bouncing under the table. Mom sat beside me, clutching a tissue in her lap. Mr. Keller cleared his throat. "Before we begin, I want to remind everyone that your father's wishes were made clear in his will. There will be no changes." Tiffany leaned forward, smiling like she'd already won. "Of course. We're just here to honor his intentions." But then Mr. Keller began to read. "To my children, Daniel and Claire, I leave equal shares in my company, properties, and assets." Tiffany's head snapped toward him. "Equal shares?" she blurted, the sweetness in her voice evaporating. Daniel froze, his face pale. Mom's grip on my hand tightened. Mr. Keller didn't flinch. "With the condition that both must jointly manage the business for the first 2 years, after which ownership may be restructured." The air in the room felt electric. Tiffany's perfect smile had completely cracked. She looked like she was swallowing nails. That's when I realized she'd been planning for Daniel to take full control immediately, cutting me out entirely. But Dad had been smarter than she thought. Tiffany's voice was like acid. This is ridiculous. Daniel runs the business. Claire's been away for years, she doesn't even know how things work anymore. I raised an eyebrow, keeping my tone calm. Actually, Tiffany, I've been working in corporate finance for the past decade. I think I'll manage just fine. Her eyes narrowed at me, but Daniel cleared his throat, clearly trying to avoid a scene. Let's not do this here. But Tiffany wasn't done. She turned to Mr. Keller like she could charm him into rewriting Dad's will. Surely there's a way to speed up the restructuring? Mr. Keller gave her a polite but firm smile. Mrs. Daniels, your father-in-law was very specific. Joint management is a binding condition. Attempting to alter it could lead to forfeiture of assets. I watched Tiffany's jaw tighten so hard I thought her teeth might crack. She stood abruptly, her heels clicking sharply on the wood floor. Fine. But don't expect me to sit back while someone who hasn't been here tries to take what my husband has worked for. She swept out of the room, slamming the study door behind her. Daniel sighed, rubbing his forehead. Claire. I didn't know she'd react like this. I didn't respond. Because deep down, I knew this was just the opening move. Dad had left us equal power, but Tiffany was going to turn this into a war. And I wasn't planning on losing. It didn't take long for Tiffany to make her first move. 3 days after the will reading, I arrived at Dad's main office building. The marble lobby, the polished brass railings, it all felt so familiar, yet strangely different without him here. As I stepped out of the elevator onto the executive floor, I noticed whispers. Staff members glanced up at me, then quickly looked away. Something was off. I walked into my new office, Dad's old office, and found a stack of documents on the desk. On top was an anonymous memo. It read, "Watch your back. She's spreading lies." I didn't have to guess who she was. Not an hour later, one of the senior managers, Mark, came in, looking uneasy. Claire, I just thought you should know. Tiffany's been telling people you plan to sell the company. That you're here to cash out and disappear. I clenched my jaw. And people believe her? He hesitated. Some do. She's been here for years. They trust her. And, well, you've been away. I thanked him, then sat back in Dad's leather chair, staring out the window. Tiffany was smart, she wasn't attacking me directly. She was poisoning the well, planting seeds of doubt before I could even take my first real step. But Dad didn't raise me to roll over. If Tiffany wanted a game of strategy, I was more than ready to play. My first move? Win over the very people she was trying to turn against me. And I had just the plan to do it. The next morning, I arrived at the office an hour earlier than usual. The halls were quiet, the air smelled faintly of fresh coffee from the break room. Instead of heading straight to my office, I went floor to floor, stopping by each department. I greeted everyone by name, I'd memorized them from Dad's old employee rosters. I asked about their projects, their families, and their concerns about the company's future. Some looked surprised, others wary. But I could feel the tension start to loosen. By noon, I invited all department heads into the conference room. The long oak table gleamed under the lights. I stood at the head, just where Dad always had, and spoke from the heart. I know my sudden return has raised questions. I understand you're used to someone else running things. But this company isn't just a business, it's part of my family's legacy. I'm not here to sell it. I'm here to make it stronger. I outlined a plan for new benefits, employee profit sharing, and better training opportunities. I didn't just talk numbers, I talked vision. Dad's vision. I could see the shift in the room. Skepticism turned into curiosity, and then cautious hope. After the meeting, Mark, the senior manager, lingered. That was smart. You reminded them of your father, in a good way. But, he lowered his voice, Tiffany's not going to stop. She's going to push harder now. I smiled. Let her. She's about to find out that I'm not so easy to push over. What Mark didn't know is that I'd already uncovered a piece of information Tiffany would never want me to know, and it was going to change the game entirely. 2 days later, my hunch paid off. I was in Dad's old office, sorting through a drawer of dusty files, when I found a slim black folder wedged behind some ledgers. It wasn't labeled, just a plain, worn cover. Inside were neatly clipped documents, and Tiffany's name appeared on almost every page. Invoices. Payments. Contracts. All signed off during her time as acting advisor for my brother. Except these contracts weren't normal. They were funneling large amounts of money to a shell company registered under her cousin's name for consulting services that didn't exist. She was bleeding the company dry while making it look like legitimate expenses. I leaned back in Dad's leather chair, my heart racing. Tiffany wasn't just manipulative, she was a thief. And if I could prove this, her grip on my brother and the company would shatter. Still, I knew I had to be careful. If I confronted her too soon, she could destroy evidence or twist the story to make me look like the villain. So I made copies of everything, paper and digital, and stored them in a private, encrypted folder. Then I reached out to someone I trusted more than anyone in the world, my father's old lawyer, Mr. Harris. When I showed him the documents, he raised an eyebrow and gave a slow whistle. "You realize," he said, "this is enough to put her in jail." A smile crept onto my face. "Oh, I know. But I'm going to let her bury herself before I strike." Because tomorrow, Tiffany had called for a family meeting, and I was almost certain she was planning to humiliate me in front of everyone. What she didn't know was that it would be her last chance to try. The family meeting was held in the grand dining room of Dad's old estate. The mahogany table gleamed under the chandelier, set for 8, though I doubted there'd be much eating. Tiffany arrived first, dressed in a crisp white suit that screamed CEO, her platinum blonde hair pulled into a sleek bun. My brother trailed behind her, shoulders hunched like a man carrying invisible chains. The rest of the family trickled in, uncles, aunts, and a few shareholders Tiffany had clearly invited to make this official. She wasted no time. "Thank you all for coming," she began, her voice smooth and commanding. "I called this meeting to clarify the future of Dad's company. As you all know, my husband, as the sole son, is the rightful heir. Unfortunately, my sister-in-law has struggled to accept this." A few heads turned toward me. I kept my expression neutral, hands folded in my lap. Tiffany's eyes glinted. "It's time for transparency. For the good of the company, I think she should step away completely and sign over any remaining shares." There was a murmur of agreement from her side of the table. My brother stared at the polished wood, not meeting my eyes. I let the silence stretch for a moment before I spoke. "Transparency?" I asked softly. "Funny you should bring that up." From my bag, I pulled out a thick envelope and slid it onto the table. "I've been going through Dad's files. And I found some very interesting transactions, all during your time as acting advisor." Tiffany's smirk faltered. "What are you implying?" I opened the envelope and began laying out copies of the documents, one by one. Invoices. Shell company records. Wire transfers. "I'm implying," I said, meeting her gaze, "that you've been siphoning money from the company into a fake consulting firm. A firm owned by your cousin." The room went dead quiet. My brother's head snapped up, eyes wide. "That's absurd." Tiffany snapped, her voice cracking for the first time. "These are lies." "They're not lies," I interrupted. "They're evidence. And copies of these have already been sent to Dad's lawyer, the board of directors, and, oh yes, the police." She froze. My brother looked between us, his face pale, as if the floor had just vanished beneath him. I leaned back in my chair, calm and steady. "So, Tiffany, do you still want to talk about me stepping away?" For a moment, nobody moved. The only sound was the faint ticking of Dad's antique clock on the wall. Tiffany's carefully curated confidence was slipping like sand through her fingers. My brother finally spoke, his voice low but shaking. "Is this true?" he asked her, eyes searching her face. She gave a brittle laugh. "Of course not, baby. She's just making things up because she can't handle losing. She's always been jealous. Answer me." His voice cracked, louder this time, making even the uncles flinch. Tiffany's mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. The silence was all the answer he needed. He stood slowly, pushing his chair back. I saw his hands trembling, though whether from rage or shock, I couldn't tell. "All this time, I defended you. I believed you. And you were stealing from Dad's company? From our family?" Tiffany's mask crumbled. "It wasn't like that, Don't," he said sharply, holding up a hand. "Just don't." He turned to me, and for the first time in months, maybe years, there was no distance in his eyes. Only guilt. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "For everything. I should have listened to you." The board members were whispering now, the air electric with tension. My brother straightened his shoulders, his voice taking on a firmness I hadn't heard from him in years. Effective immediately, he announced, "Tiffany is removed from any and all involvement with the company. I'll work with my sister to ensure the board sees the full evidence. And we will press charges." Tiffany gasped. "You can't." "I just did," he cut her off. She stood there, frozen, her perfect image shattered. Then, with a sharp scrape of her chair, she stormed out, slamming the heavy oak door behind her. I didn't smile. Not yet. The damage she'd done was deep, and trust wasn't something that could be rebuilt overnight. But for the first time since Dad's funeral, I felt the smallest flicker of hope. This wasn't over. But the empire was ours again. The next few weeks were a blur of meetings, paperwork, and long, late-night calls with the company's lawyers. Tiffany tried to fight back at first, threatening to ruin the family in the press, but her threats fizzled the moment our legal team presented her with the full, undeniable trail of stolen funds, forged approvals, and secret accounts. In the end, she took a plea deal, no jail time, but a complete forfeiture of her shares, repayment of what she had siphoned, and a permanent ban from holding any position in the company. It was humiliating for her, and I couldn't help but think Dad would have approved of the justice served. My brother and I sat together in Dad's old office the day the deal was signed. The sunlight poured through the big bay windows, illuminating the worn leather chairs and the faint scent of his cologne still lingering in the air. "I don't know how to make up for all of it," my brother said quietly, staring at the desk. "For believing her over you. For letting her twist things." I shook my head. "It's not about making it up. It's about making it right now. We made a pact that day, equal ownership, equal say. The empire would stay in the family, run with the integrity Dad built it on. No more whispers, no more power games." A month later, we stood together at the annual shareholder meeting. I took the stage first, feeling the weight of the moment. This company was built on trust, hard work, and family values, I told the room. We lost our way for a bit, but we're back. The applause was deafening. My brother joined me at the podium, and for the first time in years, we smiled at each other without bitterness in our eyes. After the meeting, I walked through the marble-floored lobby, my heels clicking against the tiles. In my mind, I could almost hear Dad's deep chuckle, proud and approving. The empire wasn't just his anymore. It was ours. And no one would ever take it from us again.